Pull that. Yeah, so if you don't want to see yourself, you could just close your video off. Otherwise, you might see yourself. The recordings, by the way, are on our website at steveston-temple.ca, www.steveston-temple.ca. And when you get onto the main page of the website, there's a menu up top. And on that menu, there's one that says Dharma Talks. And if you click on the Dharma Talks, what you'll find is you will find all the services as well as lectures that I've recorded on there. So it's not, I mean, people have to go into our website to look at it. So it's not like it's completely in the open, but there's a way to access it if you want to, if you miss any lectures or want to see what went on in the previous one. Anyway, so last time we continued on, and I did talk a little bit about the last Dharma age and how that had really influenced not only Shinran Shonin, but Pure Land Buddhism in general. Because with the idea of this last Dharma age, the whole teaching of Amida Buddha takes on much greater prominence within the Buddhist different schools, various schools, particularly in Eastern Asia, China, Korea, and Japan, more so China and Japan. So then what we did last time at the end, I went through very quickly about sorry, just looking for. Yeah, we went very quickly through some of the reasons why Shinran Shonin wrote the what we call the true teaching, practice, and realization of the Pure Land Way, or in Japanese, the long version is a Ken Jodo Shinjitsu Kyogyo Sho Monrui, and it was later abbreviated or a more common referral to it is Kyogyo Shinsho. But anyways, this was his magnus opus, and it was written for various reasons. One was to express his joy and gratitude to the teachings that he encountered and to share that with others. And two was to refute the criticism that Honen Shonin, his teachers' teachings were receiving. And so it was like a rebuttal. And finally, the third one was for Shinran himself, is to deepen his understanding of the teachings. This is not really pointed out or brought up that often among scholars, but I think it is clear and evident that while Shinran was doing his studies, because he revised it over a course of 20 years, that he was reading it over and over and reviewing it over and over. And this is evidence of the fact that he himself was studying as he was going along. And it's actually interesting because other religious schools also do have similar strategies. And if you look at, for instance, the Mormons, you know, when the youth get to a certain age, they have to go on a mission, right? And that whole purpose of the mission, on the surface of it, is to proselytize, to go and try to get converts, right? But what they're really doing with the mission underneath that surface is that during that time, you know, the missionaries are really put to the task, and they question the religion themselves. So those that complete the mission come back with a much deeper foundation of their religious belief. And so, in a sense, Shinran was doing a similar thing in that as he was studying, or as he was sharing the teachings, he had to also study. So it was as much for his own benefit as it was to benefit the others. Much in the similar line is when I do these lecture series, I learn a lot myself as we go along and do it. So that's what a third aspect of why he wrote this Kyogyo Shinsho. But as I was preparing for my talks today, I actually realized that there was a much easier way of. Let me see what happened. Let me bring up. Oh, I didn't bring it up. Where's that? Sorry, everyone. I'm trying to share something with you, and this is what I need to share. Okay. Actually, this is what I wanted to share. So I made this up and I realized that it's probably easier for people to make connections when you can visualize things. Oh, maybe that's too small on your screen. Let's see. Is that any better? Okay, so here is actually a diagram, and I've sent this all to you so you can print it off on your own. This is a diagram that shows the connections of the various teachers. So in the future, when I reference one of these teachers, you can look at this diagram and go, okay, I know who this person is. So a picture tells 1,000 words. So of course we have Shakyamuni Buddha in the center. And this is one of there's several dates that they believe he was alive. And this is one of the more common dates. So saying he was born in 567 BC and then passed away at 487 at the age of 80 years old. Okay, so that's Shakyamuni Buddha, of course, in India. And then we have, according to the Pure Land schools, or according to Shinran Shonin, the first two of the seven patriarchs. And so on the right here, we have Nagarjuna, or in Japanese, Ryuju Bosatsu. And he was alive between AD 150 and 250. So a very long lifespan of about 100 years. Now, these are all guesses. There's nothing scientific in these. We're not sure exactly the dates, but sort of roundabout figures. Okay. And this Nagarjuna is often considered the father of what we call Mahayana Buddhism, the lineage that our school belongs to, okay, Nagarjuna. So he is seen to be a great patriarch to many different schools of Mahayana Buddhism. So this is Nagarjuna, or Ryuju Bosatsu. And also another great monk in India, his name was Vasubandhu Bodhisattva, or Tenjin Bosatsu, okay, in Japanese. And he lived between AD 320 to 400 in India also. Vasubandhu is also very well known for what they call a Yogacara school of Buddhism, and the mindfulness school of Buddhism. And as you can see, these two have the title Bodhisattva. But Bodhisattva, the way we understand Bodhisattva and the way it was used in India is a little bit different. So we take the understanding of Bodhisattva as one who is in the higher levels of the practice, almost attaining enlightenment, but foregoing his own enlightenment or her own enlightenment until all beings are liberated from suffering. Okay, so that's how we define the terminology of bodhisattva. But in fact, bodhisattva literally means one who is seeking the path of the Bodhi or the Buddha, the Dharma. Okay, so in India, this was great masters were often referred to as bodhisattvas. When we talk about bodhisattva, we often think of outer world, like Amida Buddha. Bodhisattvas are these outer worldly beings, but in fact, bodhisattva in India meant great master. Okay, so these two, Nagarjuna and Vasubandhu, and you can see that both of them are seated on the lotus petals. Then we get into China, and these are the three patriarchs of China: Tanwan or Donnan Daishi, and he lived from AD 476 to 542 in China. And then we have Tao Chou or Doshaku Zenji in Japanese, and he lived between AD 563 to 645. Then another great master in China is Shantao or Zendo Daishi in Japanese, and he lived AD 613 to 681 in China. So what's interesting about this is that of the seven patriarchs, other than Honen and Shinran, Zendo or Shantao and Tao Chou, they were the only ones that overlapped. So in fact, Shantao became a disciple of Tao Chou. All the other seven patriarchs, there's quite a bit of a time difference between their lives. And so how they affected the others was that, like, Vasubandhu was affected by reading Nagarjuna's writings. Okay, and similarly, Tanwan was affected by Vasubandhu's writings, and Tao Chou was affected by Tanwan's writings, whereas Shantao or Zendo became a direct disciple of Tao Chou. Okay. Then we get into Japan, and you have Genshin Kasho, and the Japanese is Japanese, so I don't have other names for them. And he was AD 942 to 1017. And then the seventh of the patriarchs, as Shinran named, was of course his own master, Honen Shoni, who lived 1133 to 1212. And then finally we get down to Shinran, who was from 1173 to 1262. So if you print this page out, I think it's very beneficial because you have a concrete idea, a picture of oh yes, okay, he's talking about this this one of the seven patriarchs, and they come in this order. Okay, this is where they fit in. So I think rather than just seeing a bunch of names, by visualizing it, it'll help you retain who they are. Okay, so that's what I created for today. But so getting back now to today's talk. So I mentioned why Shinran wrote this Kyogyo Shinsho, and it is actually in the preface of the Kyogyo Shinsho that he begins actually by citing three characters from the tragedy of Rajagriha, namely Devadatta, Ajatasattu, and Queen Vaidehi. And he says that how through their actions, they actually have guided us to the most important teaching of the historical Buddha, and that is the teaching of the primal or universal vow. And he goes on to, in the preface, to say how rare it is to encounter such wonderful teachings in many kalpas. And now that he's encountered it, he wants to share with others. So at the end of the preface, he says, how joyous I am, Gutoku Shinran, disciple of Shakyamuni. Rare is it to come upon the sacred scriptures from the westward land of India and the commentaries of the masters of China and Japan. But now I have been able to hear, reverently entrusting myself to the teaching, practice, and realization that are the true essence of the Pure Land Way. I am especially aware of the profundity of the Tathagata's benevolence. Here I rejoice in what I've heard and extol what I've attained. So again, he's expressing his joy and gratitude, and this is why he's sharing it with others. Of course, when he talks about the sacred scriptures from the westward land of India and the commentaries of masters of China and Japan, he's referencing what we call the Pure Land Sutras, mainly three major sutras, which is of course the largest sutra of Amida, the Contemplation Sutra, and the Amida Sutra, and or the smaller sutra on Amida. And so he's referencing that, and then all the commentaries of those these Pure Land masters that I've shown you. So he starts off the preface by expressing that, and then right after that he breaks down what the chapters are in this piece, and they start off with a chapter on teaching, and then chapter on practice, and chapter on Shinjin or Shinjin faith, chapter on realization, and chapter on the true Buddha and true land, and chapter on the transformed Buddha bodies and lands. Okay, so these are 6 chapters that he breaks it down into. What's interesting is most of Buddhist teachings, when we talk about the 3 pillars of Buddhism, they're referencing the teaching, the practice, and the realization. Shinjin is not really, or faith is not really, it's more of, it goes together with practice, right? You have to have belief in order to have practice. And so most schools, or they wouldn't have a separate category for this faith aspect. And then this chapter on the true Buddha and land is sort of a description of what one attains when they get the realization in the Pure Land School. And then chapter on transformed Buddha bodies and lands is there are teachings that are sort of what we call auxiliary teachings that on the surface say one thing, but deep down inside, they are also guiding one to the primal vow of Amida Buddha. So having said in the very beginning of the preface that, you know, he cites the main characters from the tragedy of Raja Grihar, it's only fitting that we review this story a little bit more. And we look at, especially from what we call the Contemplation Sutra, or the Dhyana Sutra, which is, it's actually traditionally viewed as teaching on meditation, okay, not necessarily on emphasizing the Pure Land. And so that was the traditional view when it first came out. However, we have the 7 patriarchs who take a very unique stance on this Contemplation Sutra. So first of all, well, before we get into this Contemplation Sutra, we need to understand who and how these sutras were selected. And so it was in fact Honen Shoni, so Honen Shoni down here, the teacher of Shinran, right? In his writing, he divides the Buddhist teachings into 2 paths, path of sages and the Pure Land path. And that division was actually pointed out by Nagarjuna. Okay? Nagarjuna said there are 2 different paths, an easy path and a difficult path. And so the difficult path is the path of sages. And this is the path of monks and nuns. So this is one who enters a monastery and practices in a monastery or on their own, but nonetheless, path of sages. And then there's what we call the easy path or the Pure Land path, right? And then Honen then further on explains that within the Pure Land path, there are those scriptures that explain directly about Amida and the Pure Land path, and those that are indirectly explain it. So there are actually many, over 200 sutras that will reference Amida Buddha, but in some of them it might be just one name amongst many other Buddhas. They do this in all the various sutras. So even in the sutras that we chant, they talk about, well, one day the Buddha was giving a talk at Vulture's Peak and Rajagriha, and in attendance there were, and they'll list off all those beings that were in attendance. So in a similar way, Amida Buddha is sometimes referred to in other sutras just by name, or there might be a brief reference to him or to Amida Buddha. Interestingly, I'm going off a little tangent here. My sister-in-law actually sent me this about a week ago now, a very interesting article on how Amida Buddha is non-binary, neither male nor female. And it is very true because Amida Buddha transcends all of that. So when I say he, it's out of just historically, it's been always mentioned as he. But in fact, I think I do agree with that fact that Amida Buddha transcends gender. So it's neither he nor she. They have both aspects, I guess, if you will. Anyways, so the Pure Land Sutras, if anybody wants that article, I could forward it to you. Very interesting. Maybe I will. I'll forward that to all of you. Anyways, sorry, it got off tangent. So it was Honen Shoni who, for the Japanese, pointed out. He said that the larger sutra, the Contemplation Sutra, and the smaller sutra, plus Vasubandhu's discourse on the Pure Land, Vasubandhu, the second of the patriarchs over here, right? His his discourse on the Pure Land. These are considered the sacred writings, if you will, of Pure Land. So in his book, his writing, passages on the selection of the Nembutsu in the original vow, this is where Honen writes, regarding the rebirth in the Pure Land way, there are two teachings. First, there are those teachings which properly illustrate the way to rebirth in the Pure Land. And secondly, there are those teachings which briefly touch upon rebirth in the Pure Land. To begin with, the teachings which properly illustrate the way to rebirth in the Pure Land are known as the three sutras and one commentary. The three sutras are, one, the larger Skravati Vyuha Sutra, Bussetsu Dai Muryo Jukyo in Japanese, or the larger sutra on Amitayus. Two, the sutra on contemplation of Amitayus, Bussetsu Kanmuryo Jukyo in Japanese, and the Contemplation Sutra. And three, the smaller Skravati Vyuha Sutra, Bussetsu Amida Kyo in Japanese, smaller sutra on Amitayus. And the one commentary refers to Vasubandhu's hymn of aspiration for birth, a discourse on the Amitayus Sutra. Muryo Jukyo Ubadaisha Ganshoge is the one in Japanese. And these three together are known as the three Pure Land Sutras and one commentary. So it was Honen Shoni who pointed out or designated which are the sacred teachings. And so it was then Shinran who took that. And as I mentioned at the very beginning of the preface of the Kyogyo Shinsho, Shinran Shonin brings out these three characters, Devadatta, Ajatasattu and Vaidehi. And so unless we know that story, it doesn't make much sense. So in this story, in the Contemplation Sutra on Amida, it starts off in the prologue by telling the story of the tragedy at Rajagriha. Interestingly enough, there are different ways to write Rajagriha. I believe this is the Pali way of writing it, but I could be wrong there. But sometimes there's the I between the R and the H, and sometimes they skip that and they make the R with this little squiggly mark underneath. Anyways, and the characters that come out in this are Ajatasattu, Queen Vaidehi, King Bimbisara, Devadatta, Ananda, Moggayana, Purna, Jivaka, Kandra, Prabha, and Varshakra. So what this story is all about, and many of you are very familiar with it. It starts off within the kingdom that King Bimbisara and Queen Vaidehi rule, and in that kingdom, the king and queen didn't have an heir to the crown for many years, and wanting an heir to the throne, they visit this mendicant. I can't remember which character it is. It's one of the last three characters. Anyways, they go to visit this mountain ascetic who was sort of known to be a sayer, could sort of see the future. And the mountain ascetic reassures the king and the queen, saying, "Not to worry," he said, "when my time comes, I will be reborn as your son." And so then the king asks, when that will be. And the ascetic tells him, "Just be patient. When my time comes, I will be reborn as your son." Well, this didn't sit well with the king. And so he gets his guards to go and kill the ascetic to speed up the process. But just before he dies, the ascetic then says, "Mark my words, I will get my revenge." So anyways, after he passed away, lo and behold, Queen Vaidehi becomes pregnant. And so the king and queen are overjoyed with the fact that they're going to get their long-awaited heir to the throne. However, as it gets closer to the birth date, both the king and queen start worrying about the prophecy that the ascetic had said before he passed away. And so, out of great fear, when the baby is born, the queen gives birth on top of a tower, and they throw the infant off the tower right away. As soon as they did do this, though, they realized the error in the way of thinking, and they rushed down to see. And miraculously, the infant is unscathed, except for one baby finger is deformed. So the king and queen are very thankful that nothing else has happened to the infant, and they raise the infant with all the love and care that any parent can. But as the prince, his name is Ajatasattu, as he gets older, and this is where one of the cousins of the Buddha, Devadatta, who was always a thorn in the Buddha's side from when he was young, Devadatta decides to be like the what would you call it, the person that wants to cause trouble. And so he approaches Ajatasattu and he asks him, he says, "Do you know, has anybody told you what happened to your baby finger and how that came about. And Ajatasattu tells him, no, I just heard there was an accident when I was an infant. So Devadatta then goes on to tell him the whole story of the sayer and how he was murdered and how he was thrown off, Ajatasattu was thrown off the tower. And so as Ajatasattu hears this, he starts getting full of rage. And Devadatta points out that his rightful position is to take that revenge. So Ajatasattu then confronts his father, King Bimbisara, and when the king acknowledges the fact that yes, they did throw him off the tower, Ajatasattu has him arrested and thrown into prison. And his whole idea was that he was going to torture his father by starving him to death. Now, he didn't do anything to his mother at that time. So when Queen Vaidehi, what she would do is go and visit King Bimbisara in prison. But what she would do before she went in, she would roll herself in honey, and she would hide bread in her clothing, different types of food. So when she would visit King Bimbisara, he would get fed, basically. So over a course of time, Ajatasattu asks his guards, has my father passed away yet? He hasn't eaten for an extended period of time. To which the guards tell him, no, he's doing fine. And they tell him, in fact, that Queen Vaidehi has been sneaking in food to him. So Ajatasattu is, again, filled with rage, and he's about to kill his mother. But before he does, he's told by his royal advisors that he can't do that. He says there have been many cases of sons killing their fathers, taking the throne, usurping the throne. But in all the history of mankind, there has never been any son who has killed their mother. So this would be a terrible thing to do. So instead, Ajatasattu realized, okay, I can't do that, but what I can do is confine her to her quarters. So he basically puts her under house arrest. And so it's from there that Queen Vaidehi laments on her condition, and she seeks an audience with the Buddha. And it said that miraculously, when she has this desire to meet the Buddha, two of his disciples appear, and they hear her plea, and they then pass it on to the Buddha. And so then the Buddha then comes, and Vaidehi expresses her great suffering and sadness. And the Buddha actually shows Vaidehi many different Buddha lands, if you will. And it's then that it's said that Queen Vaidehi makes a desire or wish to be born into Amida's Pure Land. So with that, we get into the main body. And so the main body consists of what we call the 13 meditative practices of contemplation on the 13 features of Amida, the Bodhisattvas, and the Pure Land. And then there's also 3 non-meditative practices, method of birth in the Pure Land for the aspirants of the 3 ranks. And so what is this all about? Well, so the 13 meditative practices, basically the Buddha gives Vaidehi a direction on how one can contemplate on the Pure Land. And it's a step-by-step process. So he starts off by telling Vaidehi, contemplate on the setting sun. So this means facing the west and contemplate on the setting sun over the ocean. And so you're supposed to focus on that direction. Then the next, as you focus on the ocean and go to the end of where you can see or focus, then you focus on the water of the Pure Land. And once you're able to focus on the water of the Pure Land in the west, then you can then focus on the ground and the various aspects of the land. So the trees and the pools in the land that are filled with jewels and the pavilions. And then you focus on the lotus throne of Amida. And then next you focus on the actual image of Amida. And then finally you actually see Amida as a physical form. And then the two attendants of Amida, Avalokiteshvara or Kannon in Japanese, and Mahasamaprata or Seishi. These are two attendants of Amida, focusing on them and various other aspects of the Pure Land. So these are actual guided meditative practices on how one could envision or how can focus on the Pure Land. Then he goes on to describe about what we call the three non-meditative practices. And so now from there, he's saying, okay, these are actual ways that practitioners can go into that Pure Land. So first of all, it was a way of focusing on it. And then now these are actual ways of getting in. And so what he does is he ranks sentient beings from the highest level, the highest rank. Okay? So the way I often describe this is if we look at our society today, we have, the high class, the middle class, and the low class. Well, this is sort of the same thing, like the highest of the high. In this case, these are more to do with practice, and they're the highest level, the highest rank. These are individuals who have the deepest understanding of the Dharma, and they can follow the practices as they see fit, and they can attain to the Pure Land or enter the Pure Land because they're able to fulfill all the practices, etc. Then you get into the middle level of the highest rank. So these are also very good sentient beings who have a great capacity, and they too will eventually enter the Pure Land. And then so forth, they go down in rank. So you have the lower level of the highest rank. And again, it takes a little longer, but these individuals, again, will be born in the Pure Land. And then you get into the higher level of the middle rank, and the middle level of the middle rank, and the lower level of the middle rank. And again, with these individuals, they are, it takes longer. They enter what they call the womb-like existence, and they have to stay there for a while before they can enter the Pure Land. And then finally, you get the lower level, and in these individuals, they can see the Buddha in a dream when they pass on. So the lowest level, the lowest rank, are individuals who may not have had any encounter with the Dharma except on their deathbed. They are introduced to the Dharma, and they have a desire to be born in the Pure Land, and they recite the name of the Buddha. And for these individuals, they'll first see the Buddha in a dreamlike way, and then eventually they'll be born in the womb existence, and then finally, in many kalpas, they will be born into the Pure Land. So that was the traditional view of this meditation sutra. So it was a way to a guided view or guided direction of how Vaidehi could first of all envision the Pure Land, and then also how then one could actually achieve this birth. And so this took a turn within the Pure Land school, especially with Zendo Daishi or Shantou. So he's down here. And Shantou, his writings on the commentaries that he writes on Vasubandhu's writings on this Contemplation Sutra, they end up influencing greatly this Honen Shoni and then later Shinran Shoni. Okay, so what Vasubandhu, or I'm sorry, not Vasubandhu, what Shantou Zendo says that so this Contemplation Sutra, um, for many centuries, I believe, or before Zendo comes around, there were many different uh, interpretations of it. First of all, one interpretation was that, well, so if a person like Vaidehi, who is the lowest of the low rank, because she tried to commit. First of all, her and her husband plotted to kill that mountain ascetic so that they could have a son, and then they then tried committing infanticide by throwing the child off the tower. So, she is this lowest level of the lowest rank, right? Um, so their understanding, one interpretation of this contemplation sutra was that birth in the Pure Land for someone such as Vaidehi was not immediate. That by repenting and taking in the name of the Buddha, that in many kalpas down the road, it's like getting a ticket to the Pure Land, but for a much later time. And um, it's like the first step in the right direction, but it doesn't mean that she's going to attain enlightenment or birth in the Pure Land right away. So that was one interpretation. Another interpretation is that, well, if somebody in this lowest of the low rank, somebody like Vaidehi, if all they have to do is recite the name of the Buddha and then enter the Pure Land, well, it couldn't be that great of a Pure Land. So it has to be a very, very low level Pure Land because, um, you know, compare that to others who have to practice diligently, very difficult practices to create the merit to be born into their different existence. Compared to that, just hearing the name and reciting the name only, that seems like such a simple practice. Well, the Pure Land that you go to with such a simple practice must also be a very low scale Pure Land. Okay, so that was another interpretation that was commonly given. And thirdly, an interpretation was that, in fact, Vaidehi, although she appears to be this lowest of the low, she is what we call incarnated being. So basically, she's here to act out a role so that we can learn from it. So that was the third interpretation that was commonly given. Um, what Chantal Zendo said was, in fact, that no, you have to uh, understand that she was, in fact, a very lowest of the low. She was not somebody special or anything like that. But the primary function was of the Contemplation Sutra was to explain how great the compassion of Amida Buddha is, in that even the lowest level of the lowest rank can be born in the Pure Land. So it was not a low-ranking Pure Land, but in fact the greatest of Pure Lands, because it's the working of the Buddha that allows even such the lowest being to be born into the Pure Land. And I've explained, some of you have heard me explain before, I often compare this to the computers. Because Microsoft invented Windows, or Mac invented the Mac computers, they made it very easy for the end user, for us, to use computers, the laptop computers such as the one I'm using today. But in fact, the amount of work that went in behind the scenes so that the end user can use it easy is tremendous. And in fact, the more work that they did on their side, it made it easier for us as the end user, right? So similarly, the work of Amida Buddha is that great that even the lowest of lowest beings are able to be born into the Pure Land. That was basically Zendo Shantao's understanding of it, Shantao's. And Shinran takes this a step further, and he says, in fact, this Contemplation Sutra has two aspects. And Shinran basically says this with the three Pure Land Sutras, that there is what we call the explicit view and the implicit view. So there's a surface meaning, and then there's one that's hidden deep below. So with this, and he reveals this, or Shinran writes on this in the last chapter of the Kyogyo Shinsho, and it's a collection of passages revealing the transformed Buddha bodies and the lands that are provisional means for the Pure Land Way. And so Shinran says the explicit refers to here, he says, on the surface, this Contemplation Sutra does in fact talk about meditation and non-meditative good acts. And these are, and the three levels of practitioners and their minds. The two forms of good and the three types of meritorious acts, however, are not the true cause of birth in the fulfilled land. Further, the three minds that beings awaken are all minds of self-benefit that are individually different and not the mind that is single, which arises from Amida's benefiting of others. They are roots of good with which to aspire for the Pure Land that Shakyamuni Tathagata taught as a distinct provisional means. This is the import of the sutra. It is its explicit meaning. Oh, and I missed about the implicit meaning. So in the implicit meaning of this sutra, though, is ultimately to show the greatness of the primal vow, that even a being such as Vaidehi can enter the Pure Land, means that all beings can enter the Pure Land. So it's emphasizing the greatness of the primal vow. And Shinran points out, of course, this is found in what we call the largest sutra on Amida. So, having said all that, I think I will continue on next week with the first chapter of the Kyogyo Shinsho, which is a chapter on teachings. This is actually a very short chapter. It's more of a statement than anything else, and I'll explain about that next week. So let me stop sharing there, and let me unpin myself, remove spotlight, and remove spotlight. Okay. I rattled off a lot. I don't think I breathed in 55 minutes or whatever. Were you able to follow me? Yes. Okay. Do you have any questions? Anybody have any questions? It doesn't have to be on this. It could be on anything. And
Sensei,
yes.
do you have this information Do you have this information from section 3? Are you sending this out, or is there a way to access it?
I just sent it out. I just sent it out just before we started.
Okay, I
So
didn't see it. I'll check.
So check your email. But yeah, basically, so now we're getting into this Pure Land of Amida Buddha, and I think one general question that we have to ask ourselves is, you know, how do we understand this whole idea of Amida? And I think that's a question that most Shinshu followers who are really study it, this is something that question that arises, I think, and I think it takes a lifetime of reading or listening to understand it. I oscillate back and forth on this of how to interpret these teachings on Amida Buddha. It can sound very fairy tale-ish at times. It depicts, you know, what the Pure Land looks like, and then you hear some scholars say, well, this is, you know, all symbolism, and we have to go beyond the symbolism. But it's very difficult when it's written so graphically. Anyways, yeah, if you have any questions and you might not think of it now, feel free. You can either email me with questions or you can ask next time as well. Oh, Linda says, I checked my email. I have no new messages, and your email from yesterday has no attachment. Okay, I will. Oh, that's funny. Just sent it out. Let me. I will send it out again, Linda. Hopefully you'll get it. I think you're on our list. Okay. You received
the
a
new on the list. I
you
received the email from last week.
you did receive one yesterday. Okay. I will double check it out.
Just the link, but it didn't have any attachments to it.
No, I didn't have it yesterday.
Oh, okay.
I made that diagram today because as I was thinking about it, I thought, oh, this is probably a very easy way of picturing or you know, understanding. When you actually have images to go along with names, it makes it a lot easier than just especially these very long names like Vasubandhu and Nagarjuna, and you know, if you actually have some kind of a visual image, it helps out. Which is actually goes against, well, when Shinan talks about Amida Buddha, he actually says better than the statue is the image of Amida, and better than the image is the name, the six Namo Amida Butsu. And the reason why he says that is because we actually can get too attached to images and statues. And so for Amida, it's more of a concept, but for these individuals, they were actual historical figures. So I don't think there's any harm in having images because they were actual historical beings. Anyways, I will send that out. Are there any questions or comments or? If
Grant?
not, yes.
Is it okay if I print that out for our temple?
By all means, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
It's really well done. I have no attachment to any of these things, so
okay.
please use them as.
Very well done. Thank you.
Okay. Did you get the email?
She just checked. Yes. Yes, we got it.
Okay.
It came in at 7:32.
Well, Linda, maybe. Maybe. Oh, you know what I could have done? I could have sent it to one group and not the other. But I will. Yeah, I will try to resend it. Okay. So with that, thank you everyone, and I'll see you next week, and we'll just continue on from here. So what I'm going to do next week is talk a little bit about the chapter on teaching, and primarily Then we get into what we call the larger sutra on Amida, and focusing on what we call the primal vow of Amida Buddha, which is most important thing to understand in Jodo Shinshu Buddhism, yet probably one of the most difficult things to understand. So I think a lot of times people don't go directly into it just because it is so difficult to try to wrap your head around. But we'll try. We'll see how it goes. Okay. So thanks everyone, and see you next week then.